Why did no one else see him? That was the first thought that struck Carter as she stepped out of the market, the smell of roasted peppers and frying tortillas drifting through the evening air. People passed by with phones in hand, laughing, scrolling, living in their bubbles. But her eyes locked on the figure stumbling just ahead near the taco shop. At first she thought it was just another drunk tourist. San had plenty of those. A man weaving through the sidewalk, clutching at the air, muttering something incoherent. She adjusted the grocery bag in her arms, pulling her phone from her pocket with the other hand. But then the man staggered into the yellow glow of a streetlight, and her world snapped into sharper focus. Blood. It soaked through his torn uniform, a deep crimson running down his ribs, dripping onto the pavement with every halting step. His face was ghost pale, lips trembling, eyes glazed. He was young 20s at most, and his right leg dragged like it no longer belonged to him. The desert tan of his fatigues was shredded and dark with red. His shoulder bore the faint outline of rank, corporal, a Marine. Froze for half a breath. The crowd didn't. People streamed past him. A couple argued over a menu, a teenager laughed into his phone, a family ducked into the taco shop without sparing a glance. Nobody was stopping. Nobody was helping. Nobody seemed to notice that a man was bleeding out in front of them. Her training kicked in before her hesitation could. She dropped the grocery bag, apples rolling across the concrete, a carton of milk bursting against the curb, and rushed to him. Hey, sit down, you're bleeding." Her voice came fast, low, controlled. She caught his weight as he buckled, lowering him carefully to the sidewalk. His breath rattled, shallow and sharp, and he didn't fight her. He was too weak. "I'm an EMT," she said, ripping open the Velcro strap of her belt pouch. Gauze, gloves, tape, her hands knew where everything was. She pressed cloth to his side, forcing pressure onto the wound. Blood oozed through instantly, hot against her fingers. The Marine's lips parted, but no words came. He just nodded faintly, eyes rolling. Scanned his torso with quick efficiency. Bruising across the ribs, deep puncture near his shoulder. The pattern of trauma screamed close-range violence, not an accident. Her pulse hammered. Something was wrong here, more wrong than just a wounded man on a sidewalk. From the corner of her eye, two shadows broke from the pedestrian stream and moved directly toward them. She glanced up. Two men. One tall, a black hoodie pulled low, hands hidden in the pocket. The other broader, shaved head, tattoos curling up his neck like black vines. They weren't meandering. They were coming straight for her and the Marine. Her gut went cold. "Back off," the taller one said flatly, voice a low growl. His eyes flicked to the Marine slumped at her side. His body moved without asking permission. She shifted half in front of the Marine, pressing harder on his wound with one hand while holding her other out, palm up. "He needs help. I've called for an ambulance." The tattooed man sneered. "No one asked you to." His words dripped with disdain as if her presence offended him. "Walk away." The Marine stirred weakly, trying to push himself up. His cracked lips whispered just loud enough for her to catch. "They followed me." The pieces slammed together inside her head. This wasn't coincidence. These weren't random bystanders. They had tracked him, targeted him, and now they wanted to finish what they started. Her chest tightened, but she planted her feet. "You're not touching him," she said, voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. The man in the hoodie moved first. His hand flicked out of his pocket, and in the pale streetlight, steel flashed. A blade. Time slowed into fragments. The lunge wasn't toward her, it was angled for the Marine's chest. She didn't think, didn't weigh the risk, she just moved. Her body threw itself sideways, into the path of steel meant for another. Pain seared white-hot as the knife sliced across her arm. Her scream tore out, sharp and raw, but her stance didn't break. Another flash, another arc of metal. This one carved across her lower back as she twisted, grappling the attacker's wrist. She forced the blade downward, muscles straining, fingers slick with blood. The tattooed man's boot slammed into her ribs. She stumbled, coughing, stars exploding in her vision, but she didn't fall. She couldn't. The Marine was behind her. Another stab. She felt it sink into her shoulder, tearing flesh. Her knees buckled. Warmth spread down her side, her body screaming for her to collapse, but she stayed upright. Her throat tore as she yelled, "Help! Somebody call 911." For a split second, silence answered. Then faintly, a voice from the crowd, "Leave her alone." The attackers startled, heads jerking up. Their eyes flicked to the frozen bystanders, phones raised, cameras rolling. The distraction was enough. The two men bolted into the dark, fading into the alleys. Strength finally faltered. She dropped to her knees, vision swimming. The Marine lay flat, his eyes fluttering shut. She pressed her hands against his side, ignoring the gush of her own blood. "I've got you," she whispered, teeth chattering. "Stay with me, please." The world tilted. Her breaths came ragged. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing closer, closer. Someone crouched beside her, hands moving with professional precision. Another EMT, off-duty like her, having rushed forward at last. "You're losing a lot of blood," the stranger said urgently. "Hang on." Her vision blurred, stars merging with streetlights. The Marine's face wavered in front of her, his hand clutching her jacket weakly. She tried to hold pressure, but her fingers slipped, numb. Her last thought before blackness swallowed her was not of herself, but of him. "Don't die. Not here, not now." But darkness doesn't ask permission. It came anyway. Flashes. Red lights strobing against her eyelids. Voices barking commands. The smell of antiseptic and gasoline. "Stay with me, stay with me." Her name cut through, faint and desperate. She tried to answer, but her throat refused. A mask pressed against her mouth, cool oxygen filling lungs that felt half-collapsed. Her body rocked with movement, the lurch and sway of an ambulance. Gauze pressed into her side, hands pinning her wounds closed. She wanted to ask about the Marine, wanted to know if he was alive, if he was breathing. But her voice failed. The black tide pulled her under again. And in its silence, she clung to a single truth. She hadn't thought of herself once. She'd only thought of him. Why was it so quiet? That was first thought when she surfaced again, drifting between darkness and light. Not the quiet of peace, but of machines. Rhythmic beeping, air hissing through tubes. Sterile silence broken only by clipped voices. Her eyelids were heavy. She fought them open, one breath at a time. The ceiling above her was white, painfully white. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, washing the room in clinical light. The sharp ache spreading through her body reminded her where she was: hospital. ICU. A nurse appeared at her side instantly, as though she had been waiting. "Can you hear me?" Her voice was calm, steady, practiced. Tried to speak. Only a rasp emerged. Her lips cracked dry. The nurse pressed ice chips to her mouth, whispering, "Small sips, don't force it." The taste of water was metallic against her tongue. Her throat burned. Still, she managed a whisper. "The Marine is he." The nurse smiled, soft relief in her eyes. "He's alive, stable, because of you." Exhaled, a sound half sob, half breath. Pain radiated from every nerve, but she didn't care. She hadn't lost him. She hadn't failed. Her body told a harsher story. Bandages wrapped her chest, arm, ribs. Pain throbbed in waves. Each inhale was a war. 7 stab wounds, a collapsed lung, broken ribs. Her body had been torn apart, then stitched back together by strangers in scrubs. And still she was here. Doctors called it a miracle, called it unbearable. Hours blurred. Nurses checked vitals, adjusted IVs, scribbled notes. Machines pulsed steady, reminders she was alive. But in her mind, she was still back on the sidewalk, her hands slick with blood, her ribs screaming as she refused to move aside. Her mother's voice broke through, "Sweetheart." Turned her head weakly. Her mom stood at the edge of the bed, eyes red, hands trembling. Behind her, her father lingered silently, jaw tight, shoulders square. He didn't cry, he never cried, but his eyes told another story. "Mom," whispered. The word cracked like glass. Karen Carter fell to her knees beside the bed, clutching her daughter's hand as though letting go might break the world in half. "I thought," her voice faltered. She pressed her forehead against fingers. "I thought we lost you." His father leaned down, kissed her bandaged forehead and whispered hoarsely, "You scared the hell out of us." Tears stung eyes, not from pain, not even from relief, from guilt. They had almost lost her, for a man she didn't even know. "I had to," she murmured, voice raw. "He would died." Her father's lips tightened. He didn't argue, he didn't need to. The truth was written in her eyes. Hours later, after her family left, another figure appeared at her door. A tall man in uniform, crisp blues, his presence filling the room before he spoke. "Carter." She blinked, forcing herself upright an inch. Pain flared instantly. She winced, nodded. "I'm Captain, United States Marine Corps." His voice was firm, but beneath it lived respect. He stepped closer, removing something from his pocket. A small bronze coin, worn smooth at the edges, engraved with the Marine Corps emblem. He placed it gently on the tray beside her. "This is a challenge coin. They're not given lightly. Corporal James insisted you receive it." His gaze dropped to the coin. Her hand trembled as she touched it, heavy, real, a symbol she hadn't earned, not in her mind. "I just helped," she whispered. His eyes softened. "You didn't just help. You stood between a warrior and death. That makes you one of us." The words cut deeper than any blade. One of us. She wanted to protest, to tell him she wasn't a Marine, wasn't trained, wasn't worthy, but no sound came, only silence. That night sleep wouldn't come. She stared at the ceiling, the challenge coin clutched in her palm, the words replaying. One of us. But was she? Or was she just a woman who made a choice that almost killed her? Well, the next morning, the world outside her sterile room was anything but quiet. News outlets had caught wind of the stabbing. Grainy surveillance footage spread across screens. Cell phone clips uploaded online showed fragments of the fight, shoving the Marine back, her body absorbing slash after slash without backing down. It was raw, bloody, real, and it spread faster than wildfire. By sunrise, hashtags trended, Shield of Honor strong, hero EMT. Veterans reposted the video with captions like, "That's courage." Civilians called her a hero. News anchors debated whether she should be awarded the Medal of Freedom. Strangers left flowers outside the hospital. But knew none of it. She was too busy trying to breathe without tearing open stitches. Too busy trying to piece together the fragments of memory, knife, blood, screams, sirens. Too busy asking herself why she had lived when so many others didn't. And always, always she asked, was he okay? Down the hall, Corporal James stirred in his own hospital bed, his ribs wrapped, his lungs fragile but his pulse steady. The first words he asked every nurse, "The EMT, the girl, is she alive?" He clutched her bloodied jacket in his lap like a lifeline. He knew what she had done. He knew he wouldn't be breathing if not for her. The police knew, too. By midday, detectives had pieced together the attackers' identities. Members of a local gang known for harassing service members. Retaliation, detectives called it, had reported illegal activity near the base weeks earlier. He had interfered with something dangerous, and they had come for him. But they hadn't expected her. Not her stubbornness, not her refusal to move, not her willingness to bleed for someone she didn't know. And now the city buzzed not with fear, but with pride. Pride in the young woman who had stood when everyone else froze. Back in her bed, Carter closed her eyes. For the first time since the attack, she let herself cry, not from pain, from the crushing weight of gratitude, of survival, of knowing she had altered more than just one man's life. And yet in the quiet hum of machines, one thought echoed louder than all the rest. What happens to me now? Why did he look at her like that? That question struck the moment she first locked eyes with Corporal James in the dim hospital room. He stood in the doorway, his posture stiff, a cane supporting his weight, his face pale but alive. She had imagined this moment dozens of times since waking. She pictured him faceless, nameless, just a Marine who had bled on the curb while she held him together with trembling hands. But now he was real, bruised but real. He stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, and nodded respectfully. "Miss Carter." Her throat tightened. "You're okay." "I am," he said softly, "because of you." Silence pressed in. The monitors beeped steadily, a cruel reminder of how fragile both of them still were. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of fabric, a patch, worn and frayed at the edges, stitched with the insignia of his unit. He placed it gently in her palm. "This was mine," he said. "Now it's yours." Stared at it wide-eyed. "I don't understand." Captain, who stood just behind him, spoke. "It's rare for a civilian to receive a Marine unit patch. What you did wasn't ordinary. You didn't think about yourself. You stood between a soldier and death. That kind of courage doesn't come from training. It comes from instinct." James added quietly, "In combat we call that a guardian moment. And you are a guardian." Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to tell them she wasn't brave, that she was terrified, that she acted without thinking. But the patch burned in her palm, heavy with meaning. She could only nod faintly, overwhelmed. The visit was short. James wasn't strong enough to linger, and neither was she. But before leaving, he turned once more at the door, his eyes steady. "You didn't just save me. You reminded every Marine what we fight for. People like you." His chest ached with something that had nothing to do with her stitches. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She was too stunned, too broken, too changed. When the door closed behind him, she lay back against the pillow and stared at the patch in her hand. The word guardian echoed in her head. She didn't feel like one. She felt like a woman who had bled for a stranger, a woman still shaking in her hospital bed. And yet she couldn't let go of the patch. The world outside didn't let go of her either. The video had gone viral overnight. By the time was strong enough to sit up on her own, her face was splashed across every screen in America. Anchors replayed the 30-second clip on loop, her body shielding the Marine, her hands grappling the knife, her refusal to fall until the attackers fled. They called her the Shield, the EMT Guardian, America's bravest. Editorials described her as the spine of America. Late-night shows honored her with tribute segments. Veterans posted her name alongside their fallen brothers, writing, "This is what we fight for." But wanted none of it. She shut off the television when the nurse wheeled it into her room. She turned her face from the reporters waiting outside the hospital. She wasn't doing interviews. She wasn't a celebrity. She was just a woman who couldn't stand by while someone bled. And yet she couldn't escape it. The hospital installed security at her door after strangers began showing up, wanting to shake her hand, to leave flowers, to tell her she had inspired them. One man drove hundreds of miles just to deliver a note that read, "I served 2 tours. I lost men. What you did is what we all pray someone would do for us. You are one of us now." That letter broke her, not because it praised her, but because it forced her to confront something she had been avoiding. The world didn't see her as Carter EMT. They saw her as a symbol. And she didn't know how to live with that. Corporal hadn't forgotten her, though. On the 3rd day after his release from intensive care, he asked if he could visit her again. Agreed, though her chest tightened with nerves as the door opened. This time he entered without uniform, just a plain shirt, cane tapping softly against the tile. His face was drawn, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at her as though memorizing every detail, as though she was someone worth remembering. "You okay with visitors?" he asked softly. Smiled faintly. You're kind of the only visitor that makes sense." He sat beside her bed. For a long time they said nothing. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. What do you say to someone whose life you nearly died for, or someone who lived because you bled? Finally broke the silence. "Why were they after you?" James hesitated. His hand tightened on his cane. "I got in their way, stopped something I wasn't supposed to see. They'd been waiting for the right moment." "And you were alone?" "Yeah," he said softly. Then after a pause, "Until you were." The words hung in the air. Heavy, fragile, unspoken promises they didn't yet understand. But story wasn't just between them anymore. It belonged to the nation now. High-ranking officials in the Marine Corps were already discussing her name. Letters arrived from commanders praising her courage. One, handwritten on official letterhead, read, "Miss Carter, your act of selfless bravery reflects the highest traditions of duty, even without obligation. You defended one of our own with a courage we hold sacred. You will forever be recognized as a friend to the Corps. Fidelis." She read it 3 times, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't feel like a hero, but she realized something. Maybe it wasn't about what she felt. Maybe it was about what others saw in her. Still, she refused to do interviews. When talk shows offered to fly her out, she said no. When newspapers begged for exclusives, she declined. She hadn't done it for attention. She didn't want fame. But late at night, when the nurses left her alone, she scrolled through hundreds of messages from strangers. Young EMTs, med students, veterans, parents. One girl wrote, "My daughter wants to be a paramedic now because of you." Another man confessed, "I gave up on people until I saw what you did. Thank you for reminding me that good still exists." Those she read, those she let sink in. Because maybe, just maybe, her pain had meaning beyond herself. Days later, woke to an unusual silence. She pushed herself upright slowly, pain gnawing at her ribs, and shuffled toward the window. Outside in the hospital corridor stood a formation of Marines. Silent, unmoving, not waiting for news, not following orders, waiting for her. Her breath caught, her hand trembled against the glass. She didn't understand how fast her life had shifted. One moment, she was an EMT stumbling out of a grocery store. The next, she was a symbol of courage, saluted by warriors she had never trained with, never served beside. She whispered to her reflection, bruised and pale and bandaged, "I didn't mean for this." But the Marines outside didn't care about intent. They cared about what she had done. And in their eyes, she wasn't just any more. She was the shield. Why were they here? That was the question asked herself as the knock echoed through her small house just after dawn. She had been home less than 12 hours, stitches still pulling against her ribs, body aching from every step. Her mother had insisted on staying the night, hovering protectively. Had tried to argue, but secretly she was grateful. The quiet of her house had felt too heavy, too foreign after the chaos of the hospital. Now at 6:02 a.m., the silence broke. Her mom called softly from the kitchen, a mug of tea trembling in her hand. "There's someone at the door." Shuffled to the hallway, every movement stiff. She braced against the wall, wincing as she peeked through the doorway. What she saw froze her in place. Across the lawn, shoulder to shoulder, stood more than 100 United States Marines. Full dress uniform, perfect formation. Their boots aligned like steel, faces stoic, eyes forward. The rising sun caught their brass buttons, glinting gold in the morning light. At the center, supported by a single crutch, stood Corporal James, upright, proud. His bruises still visible, his body still healing, but his posture unshakable. He wasn't here as a patient. He was here as a Marine. His breath caught. She opened the door with trembling hands, stepping barefoot onto the cool concrete of the porch. Her body protested with every motion, but she ignored it. Her mother gasped quietly behind her, a hand pressed to her mouth. Neighbors peeked from windows, some stepping onto porches in confusion. The street, usually quiet with barking dogs and garbage trucks, now felt like a parade ground. But no one clapped, no one cheered, the Marines didn't move, didn't speak. Then, on a silent cue, they raised their hands in perfect unison. The sound of 100 arms snapping upward, salutes sharp and precise, cracked through the air like thunder. Froze, her heart raced, her throat closed. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know if words could exist for a moment like this. Corporal stepped forward, slow but deliberate, until he stood at the edge of her lawn. His crutch dug into the grass, his shoulders squared. He saluted once more, then lowered his hand and spoke loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "You stood between death and one of ours. Today we stand for you." His knees nearly buckled. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. The Marines behind him remained motionless, their salutes unwavering. Neighbors gathered silently. Some filmed, some clapped softly, others simply watched in awe. An elderly veteran down the street raised his hand shakily to his temple, standing at attention in his driveway. Continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his body. "We do not forget those who protect our own, whether in uniform or not." Two Marines broke formation, stepping forward with crisp precision. One held a folded American flag. The other carried a polished wooden box. They climbed the short steps to her porch, stopping directly in front of her. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps," the first said firmly, "we present you this flag, a symbol of courage and sacrifice." The second opened the box, revealing a custom-forged challenge coin larger than any she had seen. One side bore the Marine Corps emblem. The other held a hand-carved engraving, "To the shield, from those you stood for." Her hands shook as she accepted them. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Stepped closer, eyes burning with conviction. "You earned more than this. You gave without hesitation. That's what makes a warrior." Her mother's hand squeezed her shoulder gently, tears running freely down her face. Stared at the flag, the coin, the sea of saluting Marines, and felt her chest collapse under the weight of it all. Then from the crowd, a voice rang out, "3 cheers for EMT Carter." The Marines roared back in perfect unison, "Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah." The sound shook the street, shook her bones, shook the very ground she stood on. And wept openly, uncontrollably. She didn't weep from pride, though pride was there. She didn't weep from pain, though her body ached with every breath. She wept from the unbearable truth that she had not acted for recognition. She had acted because someone needed her. And yet, here they were, an entire brotherhood saluting her for doing what she had simply believed was right. Stepped forward again, close enough to rest his hand gently on her shoulder. His grip was firm, steady. "You didn't just save me," he said. "You changed us." The Marines stood longer, their salutes unwavering, before finally dispersing in perfect rows. Boots tapped rhythmically against pavement, fatting down the street. Some tipped their hats as they passed. Others nodded once, wordless respect in their eyes. No speeches, no media, just presence, just honor. Remained behind, settling onto the front steps of her porch as the sun crept higher over the rooftops. Lowered herself beside him carefully, clutching the flag to her chest. For a long time they sat in silence. The neighborhood returned slowly to normal, dogs barking again, traffic humming faintly. But between them lingered the weight of something unshakable. Finally whispered, "I didn't know what to expect." "You deserve to feel what we feel," said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Every time someone has our back." She looked at him, studying the bruises still healing across his face. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He was tethered to her now by blood, by sacrifice, by survival. "Would it be okay," he asked softly, "if I visited again?" Exhaled slowly, the faintest smile tugged at her lips. "I'd like that." As the morning light spilled across the street, Carter realized something she hadn't been able to admit in the hospital. She hadn't just survived. She had been given something rarer, respect not from rank or uniform but from courage. And though she still felt like an ordinary woman, bruised and broken, the men who saluted her that morning would never see her that way again. Neither, she realized, would she. Why was healing harder than bleeding? That thought haunted as weeks dragged into months, each day a reminder that surviving the knife was only the beginning. The stab wounds had closed into ugly scars, pink and jagged across her ribs, shoulder, and arm. But her muscles screamed with every attempt at movement, every push to reclaim the body she once trusted. Physical therapy became her new battlefield. Twice a week, fluorescent rooms replaced the sidewalks she had bled on. Machines hummed, trainers urged her forward, and pain flared through her ribs like lightning. Her right hand, the one that had grabbed the blade, trembled uncontrollably when she tried to grip even the objects. Jars mocked her, buttons her. Sometimes just holding a pen felt like climbing a mountain. She tried to laugh it off with her therapists, but when the lights dimmed at night and her mother finally left her alone, broke. The truth was unbearable. She wasn't sure if she'd ever be the same. It wasn't the physical scars that undid her. It was the memories. Each time she closed her eyes, the night replayed in cruel detail. The glint of steel, the weight of blood soaking her clothes, the scream that tore from her own throat as she refused to fall. Worst of all, the moment she realized she might die, not from heroics but from inevitability. The helplessness of it suffocated her. She told no one, not even. But he came anyway. At first, Corporal James visited with the stiff formality of a Marine. Updates about his recovery, polite questions about hers. They would sit on the porch, sipping coffee, watching kids ride their bikes in circles. The conversations were short, awkward, restrained. But little by little, the stiffness faded. One evening, returned from therapy angry, frustrated after failing to open a simple jar in front of her therapist. She slammed it onto the counter, blinking back tears. When she walked outside, was waiting, 2 bags at his feet. "What's that?" she muttered, still seething. He grinned sheepishly. "Today we fight your worst enemy." From the bag, he pulled 2 Lego sets. Blinked, "You're kidding me." "Motor skills," he said proudly, tapping the side of his head. "Marine-approved rehab." For hours, they sat cross-legged on the living room floor, piecing together a miniature battleship. Her hand trembled, her stitches ached, but when she finally snapped the last piece into place, she cried. Not for the toy, but for the proof that healing didn't need to be grand. It just needed to be progress. From then on, wasn't just a visitor, he was her anchor. Still, the world outside her quiet home wasn't ready to let her fade. The video of her shielding him had exploded into something beyond comprehension. At first, she ignored it. But then came the letters. Hundreds, then thousands. From veterans, widows, children in ROTC, young women studying to become EMTs. One read, "My daughter wants to be strong because of you." Another, "I gave up on people until I saw you. You reminded me that good still exists." One night she opened an envelope from a 12-year-old girl named Harper. The handwriting was shaky, the words simple. "You made me feel like girls can be strong too. When I grow up, I want to help people like you." Pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She hadn't asked to inspire anyone. She hadn't asked for the spotlight. But maybe this was the kind of attention that mattered, not fame, not television, but hope. The Marines didn't stop either. Invitations poured in from bases, fundraisers, ceremonies. At first, she declined them all. She wasn't ready to stand in front of strangers to relive the night in speeches. But slowly, with by her side, she accepted one. A joint Army-Marine fundraiser. The ballroom was filled with uniforms, medals, flags, and polished shoes. Wore a simple dress, her scars hidden beneath fabric, but her nerves rattled with every step. When she was called to the stage, silence rippled across the room. She gripped the podium, hands shaking. I didn't have time to think about what I might lose, she said softly, voice trembling. I only thought about what I might save. The words weren't rehearsed. They were raw, simple, true. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the room rose to its feet in applause. Soldiers, officers, civilians, standing not just for her but for what she represented. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, walked her to the car. He looked striking in his formal blues, medals gleaming. She in her black dress, shoulders squared but heart pounding. "Do you ever think," he asked quietly, "how different everything would have been if you hadn't stopped that night?" "All the time," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood together in silence, the hum of the city around them. Then, without words, he reached for her hand, the same hand that had once grabbed the blade for him. He held it gently, reverently. Didn't pull away, she didn't need to. Something had shifted. The shift became undeniable weeks later. An official letter arrived from the Marine Corps headquarters. She had been nominated for the Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest honor the Marines could give a civilian. She stared at the envelope in disbelief, her hands trembling as she read the words. She hadn't even known such an award existed. The ceremony in Washington was intimate, quiet, formal. Generals, officers, cabinet members lined the room. Cameras flashed. The commandant himself placed the medal around her neck, the weight heavier than she expected. As applause filled the hall, scanned the crowd, searching for one face. There he was, standing tall, a faint smile on his lips. Her heart steadied. Because in that moment, beneath the weight of the medal and the gaze of the nation, she still felt like the woman who had simply stepped forward when no one else did. And maybe that was enough. Back home, things were quieter, though never the same. Her scars faded to pale trails across her skin. Her hand regained most of its strength. She slept more soundly now, though nightmares sometimes pulled her back to the sidewalk. Her neighbors greeted her differently, not just polite nods but respect, admiration. One afternoon, she stepped out of a store and saw a boy tumble off his bike, scraping his knee on the pavement. Without thinking, ran to him. She checked his injuries, calmed his tears, bandaged him with tissues from her bag. When he smiled through his sniffles, she realized something profound. She was still the woman who ran in when others froze. And no medal, no video, no salute could change that. Why hadn't he told her sooner? That question gnawed at one quiet afternoon on the beach. She sat on the sand beside Corporal, the waves breaking softly in the distance, gulls circling lazily above. For weeks, they had grown closer, coffee on her porch, walks by the pier, shared silences that said more than words. But that day, his eyes held something heavier. "They wanted me dead," he finally said, his voice flat, gaze locked on the horizon. Turned, confusion clouding her face. "What do you mean?" That night wasn't random. His jaw clenched, the muscles tight beneath bruises that still hadn't fully faded. It wasn't just a mugging or some street thugs. It was a hit. Her breath caught. She thought back to the way those men had moved, direct, deliberate, like predators cornering prey. She had known it wasn't random, but hearing it confirmed chilled her to the bone. "Why?" she whispered. He hesitated, then exhaled. "Military intelligence confirmed it. I'd stumbled onto something smuggling. Stolen gear moving through civilian ports. I reported it. The wrong people found out. Retaliation came fast." His eyes flicked to hers, raw with guilt. "I wasn't supposed to survive, but I did because of you." Stared at the surf, the words sinking like stones. For weeks, she had been wrestling with her own scars, her own recovery. Now she realized she had stepped into something bigger, not just an act of courage, a collision with a network of criminals who had wanted a Marine silenced. "So if I hadn't, you wouldn't be sitting here," he finished, his voice low. The truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable, wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the ocean. Then, after a long silence, she tried to lighten the weight. So I saved a great. Now I'm in a real action movie. Chuckled, the tension breaking for just a moment. You didn't sign up for this. No, she admitted softly, but neither did you. Their laughter faded into quiet, but something had shifted. The bond forged in blood had deepened into something neither could name. But the world, meanwhile, wasn't done with Carter. The White House reached out. At first, she thought the email was spam. But 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up to her door with government plates, and she realized this was real. The president himself had heard her story. He wanted to meet her. His hands shook as she read the official letter, disbelief etched on her face. She hadn't wanted fame, hadn't asked for attention, but now the weight of her story had reached the highest office in the country. The ceremony was private, not broadcast live, not turned into spectacle. Inside the White House, she was ushered through quiet hallways lined with portraits, her breath catching at every step. Generals, cabinet members, Medal of Honor recipients filled the room. And there she stood, Carter EMT, bandaged scars still fresh beneath her blouse, clutching a challenge coin and a unit patch. When the president placed a medal around her neck, she felt her heart pound harder than it had the night of the attack. Not because of pride, not because of cameras, but because in that room, surrounded by the most powerful figures in the nation, she still felt like the same woman who had simply knelt on a curb and refused to move. Afterward, she searched for one face. He was there in the back of the room, standing straight despite his injuries. When their eyes met, he nodded once. She clutched the medal, heart steadying. That evening, back in her small apartment, she placed the award on a shelf beside a photo of her parents and the miniature Lego battleship she had built. She stared at it for a long time, wondering how her life had unraveled into something she barely recognized. Broke the silence. I don't want to waste time anymore. She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I don't want to just visit on weekends. I don't want to just thank you. I want to be there with you, for you. Her chest tightened, heart pounding against tender ribs. He wasn't just thanking her. He was confessing something else. She swallowed hard. I was hoping you'd say that. The words came out softer than she intended, but they carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. Smiled, relief flooding his features. For the first time since that night, felt not just like a survivor, but like someone beginning again. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Was in her kitchen, wearing one of her old hoodies, humming a country song out of tune. She leaned against the doorway, scars aching but heart strangely light, and watched him fumble with the coffee pot like a man who'd never cooked a day in his life. She smiled, a rare smile that felt unburdened. She had bled on this floor, screamed on this floor, cried on this floor, but now she stood in it and felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. He turned, holding out a mug. Morning, hero. She rolled her eyes, still not a hero. He kissed her forehead gently. Still disagree. She laughed quietly, the sound surprising even herself. That day, she had an interview scheduled with a national magazine. For the first time, she didn't dread it. Sitting across from a journalist, she was asked, "What was going through your mind that night?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Nothing," she said softly. "There was no time to think. There was just someone in danger, and I had 2 feet, 2 hands, and a heartbeat. That's all I needed." The journalist sat stunned, scribbling furiously. Didn't realize it yet, but those words would echo beyond the interview. They would be quoted in articles, on posters, in speeches. Because sometimes, the simplest truths cut the deepest. 6 months after the attack, life had settled into a new rhythm. The media frenzy had dimmed, though her name lingered in circles she never expected: military units, first responder academies, classrooms. Her story had become a case study. Returned part-time to EMT work, slowly easing into calls again. The first stabbing report nearly broke her. Flashbacks slammed into her chest as sirens wailed, but she forced herself to breathe, to remember she had survived worse. She didn't erase the fear. She worked with it. Her scars ached, her ribs protested, but she was back. And never left her side. Their bond had deepened past gratitude, past survival. They were more than two people who had endured a night of violence. They were each other's reason to keep moving forward. One quiet morning received another letter. This one wax-sealed, formal, from the Secretary of Defense. She was being invited to speak at the Armed Forces Day Memorial Service at Arlington National Cemetery. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the envelope for nearly an hour. Her hands trembled. When walked in and saw the seal, he smiled faintly. "You going?" Nodded slowly. "If I can speak for all of us who never enlisted but still showed up, I will." And she meant it. Because by then, Carter understood something she hadn't on the night of the attack. It wasn't about medals or salutes or ceremonies. It was about the unspoken truth that courage didn't need a uniform. And she was ready to say it out loud. Why was her heart racing harder than it had the night of the attack? That question pulsed through as she stood behind the stage at Arlington National Cemetery, her hands gripping the sides of the podium before she ever reached it. The crowd stretched far beyond what she imagined. Rows upon rows of white chairs filled with uniforms, civilians, Gold Star families. Flags rippled in the May wind, and the solemn hum of bagpipes floated across the grounds. She had been invited as a speaker. Not a soldier, not a veteran, not a general. A civilian. A woman who had once left a grocery store with a bag of apples and milk and ended up with 7 scars and a story the world refused to let go of. Her knees trembled as she adjusted the pin on her collar, a Marine Corps emblem gifted to her by unit. It wasn't rank, it wasn't earned through service, but it meant something. It anchored her. When her name was called, the audience rose in applause, stepped forward, heels clicking softly against the wooden platform. The microphone waited silent as the sea of faces looked up. She exhaled slowly, then spoke. "I'm not a soldier," she began, voice trembling. "I've never been to boot camp. I've never stood in formation or taken orders in battle." Her words lingered in the quiet air. She glanced down at her hands, scars faint but still visible. "But I do know this, courage doesn't always wear a uniform." The crowd leaned in. Sometimes courage is bleeding on a sidewalk, refusing to step aside. Sometimes it's dragging someone you've never met behind cover because you know they'll die if you don't move. And sometimes it's just choosing to care, even when it would be easier to walk away. Her voice wavered, but she steadied it. "I didn't act that night because I was brave. I acted because I could, because there was someone in danger and I had 2 hands, 2 feet, and a heartbeat. That's all it took." Silence stretched for a moment that felt eternal. Then the crowd stood. Applause rose, some soldiers saluting, others wiping tears. In the 3rd row she saw them, over 100 Marines, the same men who had stood on her lawn weeks before, now here again, their salutes sharp, unwavering. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, but she didn't look away. She let the weight of it sink in. She wasn't just Carter anymore. She was something else, something larger. And it terrified her. After the ceremony, and walked hand in hand through the rows of white headstones. The silence of Arlington was sacred, each marker a reminder of lives cut short, sacrifices no metal could measure. They stopped at one grave, knelt, pulling a coin from his pocket, the same kind had once been given. He placed it carefully on the stone, his lips moving in a whisper she didn't need to hear to understand. When he stood, his eyes were wet. "He saved my life once," he said softly. "This is me paying it forward." Slipped her hand into his. They stood together for a long time, neither speaking, the quiet weight of loss pressing around them. Finally, he broke the silence. "They want me to help train the next generation, leadership school, teaching resilience." He paused, studying her face. I said I'd only do it on one condition. She raised an eyebrow. Which is? That you come with me. Laughed quietly. I'm not joining the Corps. Not as a soldier, he said quickly. As a speaker, a mentor, someone who shows them that bravery isn't just about combat, it's about compassion. Her smile softened. Then yeah, I'm in. What? Months passed. Stories seeped into places she never expected. Her name appeared in textbooks for EMTs. Military medics studied her case as a lesson in instinct and sacrifice. She spoke at schools, base camps, churches, fundraisers. She held hands with widows, hugged children in military families, and listened to veterans whose stories mirrored her own in different ways. And always she reminded them, you don't need stripes on your sleeve to stand for something. You just need heart. It wasn't just a line, it was her truth. Still, she wrestled with doubt. Every time someone called her a hero, she recoiled. Every time someone told her she changed the world, she wondered if they had the wrong person. She wasn't fearless. She wasn't invincible. She was haunted, often afraid. But maybe that was the point. Maybe courage wasn't about being unbreakable. Maybe it was about breaking and still moving forward. On the one-year anniversary of the attack, returned to the taco shop sidewalk. The air smelled the same, fried tortillas, cilantro, lime. The curb where she had once knelt was just another patch of concrete now, but for her it was sacred ground. She placed a single red flower on the spot where her blood had spilled and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be needed that night." Her voice cracked, but she meant it. Across the street, waited, giving her space. He knew this was her moment, not his. As she stood, wiping her cheeks, a small girl tugged at her jeans. Glanced down, startled. "Are you the hero, lady?" the girl asked softly, wide-eyed. Knelt slowly, wincing at the pull in her ribs. She smiled faintly. "I'm just someone who helped." The girl grinned. "I want to help people too." His throat tightened. She hugged the girl gently, whispering, "That means you already are." When she crossed back to the other side of the street, reached for her hand. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The night that had nearly ended her life no longer owned her. It had become part of something bigger, something she was still learning to carry. Carter wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And for the first time since the knife, she believed she had earned that right. Why do some nights never leave you? Asked herself that question often. Even years later, even with the scars faded to pale reminders across her ribs and shoulder, the memory of that blade still lingered. Sometimes it came back in dreams. Sometimes in the way a stranger's sudden movement made her flinch. And sometimes, oddly enough, in quiet moments of peace, as though her body wanted to remind her of the price she had paid to be here. But with each year that passed, the memory felt less like a wound and more like a compass. It pointed her forward, not backward, toward the people she helped, the lives she touched, the way her story, unwanted though it was, kept lighting sparks in others. By the second anniversary and were inseparable. What began as gratitude had deepened into partnership, love born not from romance movies but from hospital rooms, therapy floors, and quiet evenings of shared silence. He still carried his limp from that night, though he bore it with quiet pride. She still winced at sudden sharp pains in her side, though she had learned to breathe through them. Together, they carried reminders that neither wanted erased. At family gatherings, her mother teased them. "The Marine and the medic," she'd laugh, raising her glass. Would smile, blush faintly, but her eyes would linger on with a tenderness no joke could tarnish. By then had spoken at more bases than she could count. She stood in front of Marines, soldiers, and sailors, always repeating the same truth. Courage doesn't need a uniform. She never read from notes. She spoke simply, like she was talking to one person. Maybe that's why her words landed. High schools invited her, EMT academies, women's colleges, veteran support groups. Each time she found herself staring into eyes that mirrored her own, fearful, determined, searching. Each time she tried to give them something she wished someone had given her, permission to believe that their actions, however small, could matter. And always, after her speeches, someone would approach with trembling hands or tear-filled eyes. A widow, a teenager, a quiet young man who had thought of ending his life until her story reminded him why not. She carried those encounters like medals. But the weight of being a symbol wasn't easy. One evening, after returning from a speechette, collapsed onto her couch, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered. Set down 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her. "Why not?" "Because they look at me like I'm unbreakable," she said, her voice cracking. "And I'm not. I still wake up screaming sometimes. I still can't stand crowds for too long. She stopped, swallowing hard. "I still bleed when no one's looking." Took her hands gently. "That's exactly why they need you." She met his gaze, tears brimming. "You don't have to be unbreakable to matter," he said softly. "You just have to be real, and you are." The words stayed with her. In time, she realized that being seen as unshakable wasn't the point. Being seen as human and still standing, that was where the power lay. By the 5th anniversary, was no longer just a local hero. Her speeches had become part of military training programs. Documentaries had featured her story. A book of letters written to her by strangers, compiled by a journalist, became a bestseller. She resisted fame. She turned down Hollywood offers, glossy interviews, reality TV appearances. She had no interest in being marketed. She only cared about being useful. Her legacy was written not in red carpets, but in changed lives. One summer, she visited a middle school where Harper, the little girl who had once written her shaky letter, was now 13. Harper, introduced as her role model, her reason for joining the junior ROTC, hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're already braver than I ever was." When Harper saluted her, felt her throat tighten. Not everything was public. Some of his most important moments remained private, shared only with. The night he proposed, he didn't kneel with a ring in a crowded restaurant. He stood with her on the very curb where she had bled, the city lights glowing overhead. He held out a small box, his hands shaking. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because you saved my life, but because you became it." Tears blurred her vision. She nodded without a word, burying her face against his chest, both of them trembling in the cool night air. Their wedding was small, intimate. A quiet chapel filled with family, friends, and Marines who stood in the back in perfect formation, saluting as she walked down the aisle. She wore a simple gown, scars visible but unashamed. Wore his blues, his limp unhidden. When they exchanged vows, didn't promise perfection. She promised presence. She promised that, no matter what, she would keep showing up. Because that was who she was. Years passed. The story of Carter became more than a viral video, more than a headline. It became folklore among the Marines. Recruits were told of her sacrifice during training. Civilians carried her name as a reminder that ordinary people could act with extraordinary courage. Herself never saw it that way. To her, it was still simple. She had been there when someone needed her. But she accepted that others needed it to mean more. On the 10th anniversary, she stood again at Arlington, this time beside, now retired from active service. They laid flowers together, hand in hand. Around them, young recruits whispered her name in awe. Didn't give a speech that day. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke enough. As the wind rustled the flags and the sun dipped low, she realized that her legacy wasn't medals, ceremonies, or even speeches. Her legacy was every life that had chosen to act because they saw her do it first. And that was enough. In the quiet of her home that night, sat by the window, sipping tea as the crickets sang outside. Was asleep in the next room, his steady breathing a comfort she never took for granted. She traced the scars along her ribs absent-mindedly, feeling their ridges beneath her fingers. They didn't frighten her anymore. They grounded her. She thought of the Marines on her lawn, of the child with the scraped knee, of Harper's letter, of the girl on the sidewalk asking if she was the hero lady. She thought of every moment since that night, the pain, the tears, the healing, the love, and felt a quiet truth settle in her chest. Dignity doesn't speak loudly. It doesn't announce itself with medals or applause. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.